I sometimes do wish the cameras were rolling when we were off air. We're busy talking about, do you remember when you used to watch, I think it was Good Morning South Africa, and it used to be the Get That Perfect Beat Boy, yes. Beat Boy. So my guest here, Khanyi, has volunteered to do the glutes this morning.
Absolutely not. I do not want to embarrass myself. Not today.
I don't think
I'm not dressed for it.
I don't think you embarrass yourself. I think you embarrass the rest of South Africa, because I don't think we know those things. When we used to jump out of bed and do gym in the morning, we've become far too serious. I don't know. Anyway, talking about being serious, yesterday's Parliament's Justice and Correctional Services Committee has conducted interviews for the position of Deputy Public Protector, I beg your pardon, to replace incumbent Kevin Malunga, whose term ends in December. So of the 29 applications received, 3 candidates withdrew, while 6 didn't meet the criteria. Subsequent to the nomination process, the committee was left with 8 candidates, and then we saw the withdrawal of Advocate Sonwabile Mangcotywa. There are now 7 candidates to interview. All right, so Dr. Dale Mckinley, spokesperson for the Right2Know Campaign, is with us, and political analyst Khanyi Magubane, who are here to talk about who they think is the right person for the job, or the impressions out of the interviews yesterday. Yes. Good to see both of you. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So let's talk to the candidates first. So it's only fair, and then we'll start talking who we think is the best person. And so we've got a lot of eliminations that have happened, as we heard, and they didn't meet the criteria. So in fact, maybe let that be a starting point. What are the criteria for the position of Deputy Public Protector?
Well, we know that one of the criteria is that you have to be practicing in law, either as an admitted advocate or practicing as an attorney for at least 10 years. And, you know, the criteria is actually quite interesting, because you could either be practicing for either 10 years or lecturing in an academic institution, you know, for more than 10 years. But the basis is that they're looking at somebody who's pretty senior in their career, somebody who understands the law, somebody who knows, you know, how the South African law works. And the reason why this is that the role of the Deputy Public Protector, I mean, it's a Chapter 9 institution, the Public Protector. And what a Chapter 9 institution is an institution created to protect constitutional democracy. And they are not answerable to government per se, but they are answerable to the Constitution and to the law and to Parliament directly. So I think that's a big, requirement, but also an upstanding society member. You know, they're looking for somebody who doesn't have a bad rap. They're looking for somebody who has played in the space, you know, of constitutional rights and understands what needs to be done. But I think what is kind of lacking in the criteria currently is it somebody that has a heart, you know, for people's issues? Because a public protector is exactly that, somebody who protects the public. And maybe Dale, as somebody who has a legal background, can also give us a little bit more
Not so much of a legal background, but I wanted to mention one other criteria, which I think is fundamentally important. It says the person must be fit and proper.
Yes.
Which basically gives a sense that there can't be any controversies around corruption, any cases pending against the person, and this process. And in fact, some questions are asked, for example, about Boang Jones, about his disciplinary process within the human right, you know, whether or not there was something going against him. But so I think it's very important that what we're looking at here is somebody not only who has experience, but who is fit for the job and who doesn't have some clouds hanging over him or her.
Which is very important, and we know that because we know what this office is all about, and the public do look to this office for a lot of respect and integrity. So in terms of, we know what the Public Protector herself does. What does the Deputy Public Protector do? Because if we have to look at some of the comments and accusations that have come from the now Deputy Public Protector, Kevin Malunga, who is not happy at all. I mean, he's been saying that he's been relegated to looking after staff, really, and he's not getting involved at all. What should that position entail? The Deputy Public Protector.
It's very funny, we were discussing this off air before we came here, that the Public Protector Act is not actually clear on this. In fact, what it says is that the Deputy Public Protector has powers as assigned to him or her by the Public Protector.
Ah, okay.
So, and that was one of the consistent things that came out in the first day of interviews yesterday, clarity of roles and responsibilities. Because South Africa has a long history of Deputy Public Protectors being at loggerheads with the Public Protector. We'll remember back in the days of Lawrence Mushwana, when he was the Public Protector, he had constant fights with his deputy, Mamikishai, and that continued into Thuli Madonsela's term. And when Kevin Malunga took over, he also butted heads with Thuli Madonsela and with Busisiwe Mkhwebane, who relegated him to a glorified paper pusher, as you've just alluded to. So I think it really is a travesty of justice that even in 2019, the Public Protector Act hasn't clearly defined those roles. And I think it's time for an ad hoc committee, you know, to be established into looking into the definitions of these critical roles within Chapter 9 institutions, because without a proper job description, you're going to have very powerful individuals being appointed. And this is why the process is going on right now. You know, they're looking for the best person, they're looking for the most powerful person. You walk into this role and your job description sheet is empty.
Yeah,
that's a problem.
And that poses a big problem.
Absolutely.
And opens a lot of discrepancies as to what is right and what is wrong. So let's look at the candidates now, because it's quite an interesting list of candidates. So we saw now yesterday Advocate Sonwabile Mangcotywa has gone and removed his candidacy. Any reasons given?
Not that I was able to tell, no.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we won't discuss that though.
No.
So, but we left with, first up, Advocate Koleka Kaleka,
who I have to say has been a very controversial candidate, because I mean the EFF have flagged her, you know, to say, I mean, we know that the EFF's Buyiseni Ndlozi was against her being included in the candidates list. You know, she's been flagged for some of the work that she's done and some of the controversial decisions that she's done, because remember, each political party has a vested interest in who becomes the deputy public protector, because political parties themselves had to put forward names that they thought were fit for the shortlisting. So you'll have guys like or women like Galeka coming through, and the EFF says, well, we're not happy about her in such and such a year. She made such and such a ruling, and we weren't happy. We think she has a bias towards the ruling party. So you're always going to have those tussles and struggles with the candidates. And we know that the candidate has to really be somebody that's going to execute their duties without fear or favor, you know. And so for me, it's going to be interesting to see how far she gets.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think what we've seen, if you look at the nominations and you see 5 from the ANC, 2 from the DA, 1 from the EFF, the candidates in some ways reflect the factional politics within the ANC, as far as I'm concerned, in some ways, because it's clear that there are 2 or 3 candidates that are supportive of Mckinley, for example, and that are much more aligned with what would call the fight back campaign in some ways. And then there are those that are clearly aligned with the sort of Noor Ramaphosa camp. So you have to see this within the context. The politics are playing themselves out. And that she in particular, her background, as well as Boang Jones, I think have caused a little bit of a controversy. But it's good that there are a range of candidates that we can choose from in this case.
Which is good, and I'm going to ask you at the end of it who is sort of standing out for you. But let's go through those candidates first. So we've spoken to Advocate Kaleka, Puleng Machelo, another candidate. Dale?
I don't know a great deal about her, you know, and it's not. I understand that she's basically just a practicing advocate, and that's. So yeah, this is one of the interesting things is we don't really know a lot about most of these candidates. They're not really well-known individuals. They have, a lot of them have regional experience. And if you actually look at the age bracket, you were talking earlier about experience, these are younger mostly. I mean, you've got a Boang Jones who literally only just made the qualification of 10 years of experience. He only became an admitted attorney in 2009, for example. So I think what we have is we have a situation where we have a new generation coming up. We don't know a great deal about them, but I think most of them seem to be fairly competent and have a good track record in general, whether that's in government or the private sector in practicing.
Okay, so we don't know too much about them. There's some that we know more about than others.
It's not a bad thing,
I'm saying the same thing. I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
At all, because when somebody's coming in and they're relatively clean, in inverted commas, it gives them a better opportunity to prove themselves without this dark cloud hanging over them. And what I think, you know, the incumbent or the incoming incumbent needs to really be aware of other power struggles, you know, that we can almost anticipate between the public protector and the deputy public protector, because we know that the role of the public protector has gained a lot of prominence, and it's a very high profile job, you there's a lot of vested interest in who the public protector is, what the reports that come out of that office is. And in many ways, it's almost like a one-man show in terms of the public protector is in the spotlight quite strongly, and the deputy public protector is really in the shadows, of the public protector, which is a problem because they should in actual fact be almost equal. The likes of the Kevin Malungas should be able to, give, their reports to saying this case has been handled by the deputy public protector and I have just as much powers as the public protector. I mean, could you imagine if our deputy president, David Mabuza, was really just relegated to an administrator in the presidency because the role of the president has been, promoted to be so high profile? So I think the unequal power dynamics are the real problem in the public protector's office right now.
What was, if I can ask you, you can add on, but just on that note, when we look, because we saw Advocate Malunga also serving under Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector. Did he have more of a role then than he does now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this just happened now in the incumbent public protectors.
Absolutely. For example, security clearance.
Yes.
So, for example, Malunga was a former Zimbabwean citizen who renounced his Zimbabwean citizenship, and he wasn't given highest security clearance, but Thuli Madonsela put him in charge of very high-profile investigations and let him. Now Mcubane has done basically closed the door on this and is basically not saying, and she's obviously fired several people, but I wanted to also just raise Shadrach Nkuna. I think he's a very interesting candidate, nominated by the DA, but in this case, but he was interviewed yesterday, and I think what he said was very, very important. When he was asked how would you approach this, he said it has to be independent. We are answerable to Parliament, not to politicians. As soon as you start playing politics, you lose legitimacy. And I think that was a very, very strong statement on his part.
Yeah, I like that. In fact, the funny you said that, I wrote that down too. I wrote it at the bottom of the page. Nkuna, to quote, "We are not politicians, we are administrators." And that is a very important comment to make, which leads me to this question. Why are political parties nominating these candidates?
That's an interesting one. I was thinking about it. Let's look at the way boards are elected. Looking at this organization, for instance, the SABC board, I see candidates being advertised in newspapers to saying if there's a candidate that you feel, is right for the job. I think the civil society, should be playing a bigger role in choosing a public protector. I think, or the deputy public protector or the public protector themselves. The question also is, why isn't the public protector herself part of the interview process? Because ultimately whoever is appointed is going to work with her. So I think the system is flawed because politicians will always choose somebody who's going to take a sweetheart approach to them. Somebody who's going, like for instance, Busisi Mkhwebane has been accused, of being pro-Zuma, has been accused of being in a particular faction within the ANC, has been accused, of turning a blind eye to certain politicians, but being quick to persecute other politicians. She's been accused of being captured, of being biased. And that's what happens when politicians are the ones that put you up. In many ways, you're answerable to them, as much as Shadrach says we are not. But the fact that you are chosen by politicians actually says you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if we look at this, the Public Protector Act and Parliament is where the accountability lies. But if you look at it's a reflection of the power dynamics within Parliament. The Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, which is conducting these things, ANC has the majority, DA's next, EFF is third. You look at 5 candidates, 2 candidates, 1 candidate, it almost reflects the party politics of our country. And I agree, this needs to be fundamentally changed. It needs to be a much more collective process. If we remember the interviews for the National Director of Public Prosecution.
Very much so, and I remember interviewing you, and
I was saying
you
Shamila
chose
Batory.
Shamila.
That's right, I chose Shamila at that point. But if you look at that, the process was much more open. There were civil society organizations were able to input. We had a great deal, I think, more openness in the selection of those candidates. Whereas here, I agree, it's a politicized process. That's why I said it reflects the factional politics, not only within the ruling party, but within party politics itself. So
there were objections, though. So that is allowed to happen, though. Right. The 2 names that were objected to, the EFF objected to the inclusion of Advocate Galeka, the former advisor to Malusi Gigaba, following Corruption Watch's raise, again, objection. Talk to us about this, that there can be objections, though, even though these nominations are brought forward.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's something that is very useful. Because, I mean, it's not as if you have a veto power.
Right.
So as soon as you say, I don't want that person. But I think in the case of if there are concerns, and it's going to be a situation where I think Parliament is realizing that they're going to play out a political battle, then it's best to push that candidate aside, I think. But it would be much more of a transparent process if those concerns were raised with other groups that and civil society organizations and other legal outfits, and let them come on board. Corruption Watch gave their perspectives, and the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee chairperson thanked them, but I don't think it was enough. In that case. So we need a process where the citizenry feel as though the candidates that are fundamentally sitting there are the best ones. Right now we don't know that because we weren't part of the process.
Which is a concern in itself. Let's talk to Boang Jones, because we do know that he probably is the most well-known out of the candidates that are there, and we see yesterday none of them got away easily. These questions were very difficult, and we can talk to some of them in a short while, but Boang really got the gist of it. And when Glynis Breitenbach went to him, particularly with this Eben Etzebeth saga and whatever's going on there, what did you make of it, where he was saying he was taken out of context? It wasn't actually what he meant. He's already going in there trying to explain.
He's a very strong candidate. Boang is a very strong candidate as the acting head of legal unit, the South African Human Rights Commission. Number one, he's coming from a Chapter 9 institution and possibly going into another Chapter 9 institution. So he understands that space. And I think that he's not afraid, to go into those controversial spaces like the rugby player Eben, who I think is currently still entangled in a legal wrangle with the South African Human Rights Commission, because they took him to task, he took them to task. I think that Boang Jones, what he brings to the table, number one, is his experience, but he also brings a bit of fresh air, because I don't think he's the kind of character that will easily move into the shadows of Busisi Mkhwebane. He's
quite outspoken.
He's quite outspoken, and we've seen another candidate, Mushweshwe, coming through yesterday saying, if I were to be appointed, I will take leadership. He made a very strong statement. I will take leadership, and I will make sure that my role and the cases I take on have meaning and have significance, so clearly stating that I will not be a pushover. And that's what Boang brings as well, making it very clear, if I come into this office, you can expect that I'm going to shake things up.
Interesting.
I want to take a little bit of a contrary perspective on that, which is I think Boang Jones is a careerist.
Okay.
I think that if you listen to him quite carefully, first of all, he said, he basically kowtowed to Mcubane. He basically said, I support her. I think she's done a good job. I think she's, now whether or not you agree with her and what she's done, he was clearly cozying up to the public protector and making clear where he's pushing it, what
his
side
agenda
he's
is.
The second thing was, he said there needs to be a change in the legislation in order to have succession, which is the deputy public protector must be groomed
to take over as public
clearly
protector.
And I have worked with the South African Human Rights Commission. Let's be honest, South African Human Rights Commission's track record in the last 10 years has not been great. They've done a lot of things that have been very publicly sort of like, hearings and everything. But in terms of their what they're supposed to do, I would say that the South African Human Rights Commission has a great deal to answer for. So I personally am not so excited about Boang Jones, because I think he's there for political purposes, and he plays a good game. He knows how to play it, and he's there. But he's also the least experienced of the whole entire lot. So if I was on the interview panel, I would say, young man, you probably have a future in these things, but not right now.
But not yet. You're not ready yet. Okay, interesting. I mean, as we said, there were a couple of hard questions, and a lot of them talking to the actual position of the public protector. The public protector's office, as it stands right now, it doesn't matter which side you're on, because I know that office divides South Africa. I mean, there are many that are loving the work that our public protector is doing at the moment, and there are others that are completely against it, as you mentioned at the beginning of this interview. That's the way it is. But there are 10 million rands litigation costs in that office at the moment. There are a rising number of people that are resigning and quitting at the Public Protector's Office. There's also a lot of numbers of Public Protector reports that are coming on review right now, as well as personal cost orders that are against the Public Protector herself. So we can't ignore those, and those questions were asked to these candidates. Who handled best? I mean, who really came through and got your attention and said, maybe this is the right candidate?
Look, I think all of them, I think like Dale was saying, all of them are trying to put their best foot forward. So I don't think we can really assess, you know, the true way or the true feeling that they have on these cases based on what they said yesterday. But what was clear, each candidate said, if I get into the position, I will make sure that I, you know, bring back the dignity of the office, that I bring back, you know, the status of the office. We know that the Public Protector's Office currently, like you mentioned, has been limping from one disaster to another, you know, legally, and the legal costs are rising. So whoever's going to walk into this office is going to walk into, I wouldn't say a Public Protector's Office that's in the ICU. I think that's too dramatic, but one, but certainly one that is in trouble. That's what I believe, you know, and when you walk into this office, you're the Deputy Public Protector, your role is not really clearly defined by the Public Protectors Act. You're moving into an office that has a lot of controversies. Your senior, your principal, Khanyi Magubane, constantly has calls to recall her or to remove her from her position. So what is a Deputy Public Protector supposed to do in that position? I don't think they'll have much power to change the status quo. The least they can do is move into that office and just do their job properly.
Whatever their job is.
Whatever that job is.
Because that's
whatever
worrying.
the job is going
Dale,
to be.
I was impressed by Shadrach and Kuna, I must say.
Yeah.
I think he was very honest. I think he was straightforward. I think he got it right, which is that his loyalty and the loyalty of any officer in the Public Protector is to the Constitution and to the rule of law. It's not to political parties. It's not to your superiors. And in fact, he was clear when he was asked the question, because there was clearly some questions that were saying, well, the Public Protector has a particular stance, and what is your relationship going to be? And that the sense of independence, that he was going to stand there. I think that's fundamental. So yes, we've got a very challenging situation at the Public Protector, but if we have a strong candidate coming in there, my sense is that can balance out some of the key. Because if Mcubane continues the way that she has, she's just fired 3 people within the last month or so. And those are senior investigators and senior individuals, and the COO as well. So there's going to, whoever gets into that position is going to have a strong backbone, and is going to have, I think if they come in with the support of the public versus the support of a particular political party, they'll be much, much better suited to face those challenges.
Well, let's wait on that one. Thank you again, both of you, for your opinions. It's been a very interesting discussion. So that's that position of the Deputy Public Protector that's currently out being questioned and seen who is going to take that position. Dr. Dale Mckinley is the spokesperson for the Right2Know Campaign, and political analyst Khanyi Magubane giving us their views.